This is ZRS, Zenith Radio Syndicate. I'm your host and moderator, Chauncey Diggles. And your centerpiece, Input Jack. How you doing, Input?
Very good. Very good. How about you?
Good. You had a good day?
I did. Had a good day. About 20-foot section of tree fell on our house the other day, but no harm was done. Finally dragged it out of the way.
Jeez. You know, I actually specialize in forestry, so I got my own pair of tree spurs. So if you need somebody slightly unprofessional to do it for you, let me know.
Yeah, I'll just call Ranger Diggles.
Thank you. Yeah, I go to my parents' ranch often to do that because we got to worry about, we have a lot of trees out there, so we got to worry about, branches falling down and because of the wind and storms, and that's been a problem lately.
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Do that often, much to the risk of my life, but, the more you do it, the better you get at it. I wish I could do that instead of what I'm doing now, which, I spend a lot of time at an office and looking for work too, actually, with a bigger salary because I just got engaged, so I'm trying to save up money for my fiance's dowry, so it's killing me. It's fucking killing me. I mean, why? I just wish I wouldn't have to, work, What's the point, I mean, I'd like to work at something I'd love to do, but I'm sort of doing that now. Told you that I'm an actor. I got a pretty cool IMDb site, pretty loaded reel. You've seen it. I play a doctor on TV. I'm a TV doctor.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I know. I'm doing my own stuff too. I'm writing a lot, but there's so much time goes to working at some dead-end job that I have no interest in doing, and a lot of people are sort of stuck that way. Why don't we talk about that? What's wrong with communism?
I don't know what one exactly has to do with the other, because in a communist society you still have to build houses and clean houses and fix toilets and drive petroleum around, and so there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. The problem is that our relationship with the job we do is even less voluntary than it is in our capitalist society. There's no negotiation of pay in communist countries. There's no paying for excellence in a profession to encourage more excellence. I mean, you're practically assigned a job, and generally a job that you probably find meaningless and unfulfilling. And if you've got a society full of people who have been assigned a job that they find meaningless and unfulfilling, and excellence is also not rewarded, then what kind of society do you think that's going to be? That's going to be a society that half-asses everything, that is self-corrupting and self-limiting, because nothing encourages people to exercise their will in order to end up with the circumstances they desire and circumstances that suit them best. If we were doing the things that we do creatively for money, then I don't think we would be talking about, having shitty days at work or being fed up with jobs and working and stuff, because people have a drive to contribute and produce and manifest their inner qualities in an outward fashion in some way. The problem is that we don't get to do that. We end up doing that in our spare time because we're working the perfume counter at Macy's, dreaming of what could have been. Communism puts you a lot farther from living the life of your choice than capitalism does. In fact, communism makes it all but inevitable, to such a degree that people in communist societies back in the day weren't writing screenplays in their free time. They weren't doing anything aspirational in their free time, because simply to have an aspiration was taboo. All competition throughout society was taboo. There was no competition in cinema. There's no competition in video games or television shows. We were all comrades together, united in this one ideology. So we didn't want to take jobs from other people who were less qualified for them in that society. And it does strange things to people and people's ability to dream. It's better to have dreams unfulfilled than to be unable to dream.
Definitely. And the main thing that really rubbed me the wrong way about communism is the idea that there's no private property.
Yeah, that's a tough one, because there's still going to be objects and houses and land and resources and assets. Someone's going to own them. If people don't individually get to own them, it's all going to be owned by the state. And I don't see what positive trajectory comes from giving the state every item known to man. They're going to abuse that power because that is an overwhelming power to have over people. I mean, if you look at the tenets of the Communist Manifesto, they are pretty much just a laundry list of what the state gets to have a monopoly over.
Do you think we're heading in a direction towards more socialism, communism?
It's not recent at all. The second tenet of the Communist Manifesto is to have a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. We've had one of those since the 16th Amendment. That's 100 years ago. The centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. That's the fifth tenet of the Communist Manifesto. We've had one of those also for 102 years. It's funny that those came about the exact same year. The centralization of the means of communication and transportation in the hands of the state. We have that. Not all the means of transportation. People have privately owned cars, but the means of transportation that are centralized in the hands of the state in our society are the highway system and the roads and everything that has been built with public funding and is subject to public oversight as well. The 10th tenet is free education for all in government schools. We've got that and have had that for probably 102 years. So, yeah, I mean, it's been going on for a long time.
There's no question about that. But do you think it's getting way more radical than it's ever been?
I don't know. I think we've already got several of these tenets down. Why would there not realistically then be a push to fulfill all of them? I think what we're seeing now is kind of a boom in the line of thinking of kind of a cultural Marxism and some of the other ideas of Marx that are expressing themselves not simply in a ownership of the means and ways, political sense, but in the way people interact and view each other sense. There's been a rise in Marxist thinking in general, I would say, for sure.
Would you say that's the whole social justice warrior movement?
Yeah, fundamentally that is what it is, because cultural Marxism is pretty much taking the Marxist ideas of inequality and oppression and blaming them for culture. So if there's a problem in society, the problem is culture's fault at every turn. So people wield their particular status as a weapon in a culture war against others that have different advantages and disadvantages. So it gives everyone a motivation to analyze, misanalyze, control, and dominate popular discourse based on their ideological category. And if that's going to be the case, then there's no way for a country to have any sort of cohesive structure whatsoever. It'll be this group's victories against these people compiled upon those people's victories against a different group of people, compiled upon those third groups of people, their victories against another group of people. And none of these are a principled way of life upon which to build an objective state apparatus if you're going to insist on having one of those. There's a whole lot of negative consequences to identity politics.
What are these movements, the only ones that I'm really familiar with as far as what's in the social justice warrior movement is Black Lives Matter. That's one. There's feminism, radical, very radical feminism. Are those am I missing anything else?
Gamergate has come about in a reaction to all of this. There's AARP is identity politics.
AARP. That's
the Old People's Union. Their identity is that they're old and they need to work together for the means of the old people. And on occasion they'll complain about treatment of old people in the media. I don't know. LGBTQ groups in general.
Yes.
MRAs, people who are just concerned with men's rights. Christians can be very identity political.
Well, you mentioned AARP. Is that a movement that's like hot right now? I was under the impression that it was feminism and then Black Lives Matter, but the old people are getting pretty pissed off.
No, there's just a lot of them these days. I just threw that in there to have fun.
I gotcha.
Kicking around with the old folks.
So, Gamergate, we've talked about it in length. Why don't you explain Gamergate to the novices out there who have no idea what it is, or who've heard about it and still don't know what it is? It's been around for a while, hasn't it?
It's been around for about a year and a couple months at this point. It's such a long time and so many things have happened that I think we should do that in a separate show of its own. For sure. And we can also talk about feminism in that show.
Stay tuned.
We can talk a little bit about identity politics in general. When you resort to politics of identity, you are replacing the politics of ideas, which have a lot more value in these universal applications or attempts at universal application, like statecraft. If you have a politics of identity, you also end up having an excess of power politics, people trying to dominate each other instead of working in common to overcome mutual problems. Power politics in the sense of calling people's employers, trying to get them fired for holding views unlike their own, calling in bomb threats to meetings of groups that don't support your opinions and perspectives. There's a lot of examples of what kind of power politics have been going on. People swatting each other, calling in false hostage threats to get the SWAT team to respond at the home of a political opponent. It's really some nightmarish insanity if you separate yourself from the ideologies involved. If you just look at the behaviors involved, you say, what drives people to do this to each other about a disagreement? When I find a disagreement, that means there's something for us both to learn. I can learn why the person I disagree with has their perspective and has drawn their conclusion, and they can see my point of view. If you can see 2 points of view, you don't have to agree with either one, but that means you might understand the situation without having to have an answer about the situation and a conviction that must be wielded against other people. So if there's a question about why is the politics of ideas more beneficial and more universally applicable, it's because the politics of ideas involves things like philosophy, the question of what is justice, the question of how will we find peace and be able to live in peace, ideas of collaboration, how we can collaborate and what we can collaborate on, why to collaborate. Transcendence itself is not an idea in the politics of identity. Very few people who are identity politicians transcend their identity for any reason. They're bound by their circumstance to be what they're supposed to be as a member of that group. There's very little transcending the collectivist milieu to find a more enlightened individual insight on the matter. I do not advise that in life. If you can transcend, do. identity politics relative to idea politics. Identity politics puts people narcissistically at the center of their own political universe, justifying any and all tyranny so long as it accords with their ideology and dogma. It's a refusal to accept alternate perspectives for reasons of intellectual merit in favor of accepting a prepackaged set of ideas based on either age, sex, gender, sexual orientation, height, hair color, religion. So a method that refuses to consider alternate perspectives is not going to be the arbiter of any sort of justice.
Right.
Or philosophy, or peace, or collaboration, or transcendence. It also needs to be said that criticizing the idea of identity politics is in no way a criticism of the issues that people face in this world. It's a criticism in the reactionary response to the issues that are going on, and sometimes the actions taken in response to the things that are going on in this world. There are things that make people's lives more difficult than if those problems were not present. And people have a right to express themselves in the face of their problems however they so choose. But it's just very regrettable when they use that platform of victimhood to express very illiberal and repressive ideas about other people. It's very counterproductive to solve one problem by causing 10 more and throwing out so much of the liberal attitudes that have led to a semi-prosperous society. Freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of opinion, freedom to assemble without bomb threat.
Politics, who cares?
I may be jumping ahead here. How do we move away from that party politics platform that everybody is accustomed to? Because this, would go way over a lot of people's heads.
Both of those things you just described are because of the way we are pandered to by political leadership. Campaigns and speeches and stumping, all of that is all based on in-group, out-group rhetoric. The liberals, or the Democrats, more accurately, even though that's still an inaccurate term, they're neither liberal nor democratic. The Democrats, the way they talk about the Republicans is as if they're monsters, sociopathic monsters. And that's not exactly true. I don't think there are that many sociopathic monsters. They do exist. Sometimes they're conservative, but that's not a proof of concept. And the Republicans talk about the Democrats, excluding Obama because he's a very special case for some of them. They talk about Democrats like they have no mental connection to the reality in which they live. In a way.
Yeah.
Like such bleeding hearts that they're detached from the reality. And the rhetoric that the Conservative Party often uses for its in-group, out-group dichotomy is directly responsible for why everyone thinks they're insane. They're throwing softballs to each other to make each other feel good about being Republicans together, voting Republican together, more so than they're out trying to represent their ideas honestly in an intellectual debate. Because they're not trying to do that because the Democratic half of the country is not even going to listen to those ideas. The people who call themselves independent and come to their own conclusions about things will listen to ideas expressed honestly. But the majority of voters only really respond to what they're used to getting out of political coverage, and that's in-group, out-group rhetoric. We are better than them. We have all the answers. They are total monsters. So that's why a lot of discussion of ideas flies over people's heads, because that's not the words that they're used to being said about these topics. They're used to the platitudes, shallow criticisms, and the narrow ideology that actually encompasses both conservatives and Democrats. They're really on the whole spectrum of what is possible. They're like right next to each other. It's a very, very narrow range of opinions and beliefs.
Yeah, it's very much lacking in substance and It's a lot of theater.
Yeah, and partisan politics is very much a sibling of identity politics, for sure. It's just another form of identity, is your party affiliation. There's a quote here I have by a gentleman named Brendan O'Neill. It's inherently censorious because if your political activism is indistinguishable from your natural characteristics or cultural identity, then any criticism of your political activism will inevitably feel like an assault on you. This is why student politicos in particular are insanely cagey about open debate, forever hiding themselves in safe spaces and trying to ward off campus anyone who criticizes them. That really explains what's been going on college campuses the last few years. There's just some outrageous policy and decision-making going on college campuses these days. I am so glad I graduated right before all that happened, because I would have gotten myself in a lot of trouble with these outraged clans.
You probably would have, no doubt about it.
And there's also a discussion in all of this about individualism versus collectivism. Our society has taken a sharp turn down collectivism road, and we are more and more starting to see ourselves through the lens of our group participation, more so than we derive our identity from our actual individuality. I can't ever be involved in identity politics because my identity doesn't have anything to do with the way my genes express themselves at birth. Those things are so far removed from my individuality that they're not involved with my politics.
Check your privilege.
The case for individualism is that old notion, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. What's good for the individual is good for the society. But the notion of collectivism is that what's good for society is inherently good for the individual. And there's no evidence or principle on which to rest that argument, because people do not have equal access to the forces that determine what is good for society. If you ask all the individuals in America what is best for society and what's good for society, you'll have 350 million different answers. But if you ask the government and monopolistic corporations what's good for society, they'll mostly agree with each other. They'll say what would be good for society is more of the services we provide. So would you rather have a society in which powerful interests get to determine what's good for you? Or do you want to live in a society where what's good for individuals is what constrains or shapes society? One of these sounds nightmarish to me and really dystopian, and the other sounds like the only path to freedom.
Do you think that path to freedom comes with costs?
Everything comes with costs.
Like, who would regulate, murders and rapes and basic crimes like that?
Do you think people want rapes and murders going on all around?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, so probably the people who don't want those happening would be the ones who try to stop them from happening. It's very simple. Who's going to do X? Well, who needs X? Those are the kind of people who do it. Just like now. It's no different. People who become policemen to solve crimes and stop murders will become detectives or security officers.
I know it may be somewhat annoying and disconcerting that I'm throwing what ifs at you, but what if these gangs, these rapers, were much bigger than victims? What if the victims just didn't have the manpower or the weaponry to defend themselves?
I'm going to give you a what if back. What would happen if a gang of rapers came after you right now? In either situation, you'd have a pretty rough night.
I'd shoot myself in the head.
Yeah, you can do that in any society. Certain what ifs that are not solved in today's society will still possibly be issues to solve in a different society, in a free society. The difference is the dynamic in which they can be solved. In a unfree, state-managed society, you've got to wait for the authority figures to solve the situation. But in a free society, it's up to you how you solve the situation. A community would be ridiculously short-sighted if it did not protect itself in some way from these types of situations. These situations would be even less common in a society where everything else was done freely. The appetite for rape is just like any appetite. It can be stimulated through external stimuli or diminished through external stimuli and social education. I'm not going to jump aboard the rape culture train.
No,
Because that, I think, is a exercise in extremism. But I do think that there are things about the constellation of our current society that makes these things more common than they would otherwise be. So I'm not saying we have a culture epidemic of it, but I am saying that the reasons for it are often conditional to those people's lives who feel like that's the choice they need to make.
the tendency to rape people is conditional.
Absolutely. If it wasn't, then why would many people not experience it? And the ability and willingness to inflict that kind of harm on another person is also not inborn. It's always damaged people who want to damage other people. So to say that it's always going to be a human problem simply by the fact of our birth is a kind of atheistic original sin argument, and I don't buy arguments like that, where this is just human nature and that's just how it is. It's not, actually. Behavior is not human nature. I mean, humans have the least amount of inborn instincts of any creature. That's why we need 18 years or so of parenting. You know, like giraffes. I saw a giraffe born at the zoo, and it was running around immediately. When I was born, I wasn't running around for at least a couple of years, at which point I was insanely vulnerable due to my complete lack of instinct. So to say that in spite of my utter lack of instinct as a child, one of my instincts that I did have, though, was to run around raping when those like genital systems aren't even online. It's just an absurd thought for people to have, and I don't hold it very highly.
When did you start beating off? I think we started doing it pretty early.
Yeah, pretty early, I guess.
Okay, because I remember humping the floor when I was like 2 and having sexy thoughts. I think a lot of that has to do with the TV.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Like, if these things weren't being broadcast, we wouldn't be picking them up. We can pick them up early if we see them. Children are constantly modeling adult behaviors they see and stuff. But that doesn't mean they are actually experiencing the drive themselves. They're just in a constant state of absorbing and mimicking everything they see.
Right.
So I would say that your exploits as a 2-year-old were no evidence of an inborn rapist tendency.
Right.
So don't worry, buddy. You're going to be okay.
Thank you. So you didn't beat off when you were 2? Moving on.
Yeah, input jack doesn't jack off. He jacks in. Justin Bieber!
So, to build on this, I very much share your views. The frustrating part is, whenever you discuss this sort of material to the novice, one cannot help but think of this character based in your town of Austin, Texas. Do you know who I'm referring to?
Greg Abbott.
Okay, so, let me input. Let's switch gears for a second here. Let me ask you something. When will the government start barbecuing children? I mean, that's all about they haven't done in front of us already or something.
As soon as these globalists take their tangy tangerine and
Diamond gusset jeans.
and get their all their G8 buddies and round them up and say, "No, we're gonna be giving you the vasectomies."
There's a place out in Tennessee where you can get blue diamond gusset jeans. Blue Diamond Gus, it's got it. Others don't. Blue Diamond Gus jeans.
Available at Infowars.com.
What's with that? He's pushing this tangy tangerine drink, and I mean, I guess it's a necessary evil, but that fat ass is definitely on that health drink, isn't he?
He also loves freeze-dried foods. He uses that angry approach of his to strong-arm people into purchasing things. But yeah, it was clear to me that you were talking about our friend Alex Jones. Yeah, he is a proponent and kind of a unofficial spokesman for a lot of the anti-tyranny crowd. But they call themselves the liberty crowd, and I think there's a difference and a large distinction between being anti-tyranny and pro-liberty. You can be against tyranny because you want your own freedom. To be pro-liberty, you have to want that for other people too. And I don't think they take liberty to its extent, because they still believe in the idea of a nation state and the monopoly on the use of force and legislation that the government has. That stuff they still believe in, and those are two huge obstacles in the way of liberty at the moment.
He's got a huge following.
Following is the key word. Following.
Yeah. It was some rally in Dallas a few years back, and it was huge. It was sold out. A lot of angry people were outside because they couldn't get in. I was attracted to it mainly because the opening speaker was Jim Mars. I think he's pretty cool. I like Jim Mars. He's pretty modest, and he's quiet and low key. He, got out there to introduce Alex Jones, and the whole vibe I got from it was just entertaining. It was loud. It was very a WWF kind of vibe I got. A lot of, roaring. He has this thing where he's like, "Let me hear you roar!" Then everybody, followed in unison.
It's also interesting to note the type of overwhelming machismo you were describing earlier at this pep rally, because that's a big part of that subculture. Tim the Toolman type of approach to the world around you, where it's just hammers and nails to nail down, and then done. My work is done. We stop the globalists. But what they completely lack, really, is any sort of creative vision. They're just against a whole bunch of things. But what are they for? What are they building? What are they constructing in the place of that which they despise? And if the world was just people like that, they would be pretty committed to destroying stuff. But then who would build in the absence of those destroyed things? The new ideas, the new patterns of thinking and modes of thought and principles that would guide towards a better outcome. They're kind of lacking from this group. They just find things that threaten their way of life, and then they fervently rebuke them. That's a part of the equation, but it's only a small part of the equation. So it's good for building awareness and getting people maybe to shake loose some sort of false assumption they had previously. But once you get past the beginning stages of thinking about certain subjects, Alex Jones really doesn't have a whole lot to provide other than comic relief. Because he does have some very entertaining rants and turns of phrase when he gets all worked up. It's very amusing and entertaining. It's just not insightful. It doesn't have a whole lot of ideas and concepts that are workable for other people to take and run with.
Exactly. He says a lot of truth about a lot of things, but then he also meshes it in with just outright lies or stuff that is so loony that it makes people who question 9/11 look ridiculous. It makes libertarians look ridiculous.
He makes so many appeals to people's fear. And I mean, he's fear-mongering against fear-mongers, which is no sign of progress, really, to me.
Right.
It's just funny to see a guy using the tactics of shock and awe to criticize a bombing campaign called Shock and Awe. It's funny how much he does resemble the things he rages against sometimes. His rhetorical style is very much fire and brimstone, like a lot of political rhetoric is these days. A lot of Cold War political rhetoric also, because he's kind of more of that generation, the late end of that. What is the end trajectory of getting that worked up about being upset and angry? I mean, you've got to get angry. You definitely, like Network, the movie, you've got to get angry. But then you've got to do something else besides just sit there and be angry and afraid. Because people who are just angry and afraid, that's a really debilitating combination of emotions.
Definitely, and it's mind control to agree. I think Nietzsche said it best, and I may be paraphrasing. Nietzsche would always say that the more that you look into the abyss becomes you. That's who you are. There's no real productivity beyond that.
Exactly.
There's no way to like lift yourself.
Nope.
People love.
'Cause you're pissed off at
Right.
everyone else, and you're afraid of everyone else. So you're not going to do anything about how pissed off you are. Or you might do something about it, but you'll be operating out of a state of extreme emotion instead of insight, composure, and calculating risks and making the right kind of progress instead of the reactionary emotional type of thing that is so common. People who are angry and afraid are the exact kind of people that trade liberty for security. And that's exactly how we ended up in an illiberal situation where there's so many micromanagers in the world making sure it's done the one way, and that all the outcomes are predetermined. We've traded too much liberty for security as it is. How secure are we really when we're living on such a shaky foundation?
I think one of the things that he peddles is the fact that we do need government, smaller government, but it is a necessary evil.
I'm not going to listen to anyone who tells me that evil is necessary. Conflict is necessary, sometimes struggle is necessary, but evil as necessary for a part of your fucking system and worldview? You're insane. Be very, very skeptical of people who tell you something is both evil yet necessary. That's what evil people say about doing evil things. Yeah, it makes sense given that you're angry and afraid that you would accept some sort of necessary evil to protect you. Well, no shit. But once you move beyond your immediate emotional reaction, it's a different picture. When you're not afraid of everybody because you don't choose to live in fear, and when you're not angry at everybody because you realize the world is not just something that's happening to you, then you realize there's no need to accept any sort of evil as necessary. If something is both evil and widespread, it's probably something to do something about, not something to accept in perpetuity until the end of time. For all of the human experience, we're going to be treated like children by a series of rotating masters with rights and privileges that the rest of the people they govern do not, with a monopoly over many, many spheres of human life. It's no good.
Here's something I wanted to ask you earlier when we were getting into anarchism. Given the current paradigm that we live in, with people with the same views as you regarding ideas of anarchism, how can they live now? How do you choose to live now in this state?
That's a good question. There's that Gandhi quote, "Be the change you wish to see in the world."
Correct.
If you want a free world, just start by being a free dude, a free dame, if you will. Make your own choices. Don't accept what people tell you should do. Choice is the real equalizer in the world, because everyone still has to make their own choices, and you can always choose to say no. That's something everyone stopped doing a while back, saying no. Say no a lot. Say no to everything that you don't really can't commit yourself to, or anything that doesn't make sense to you. Say no until it does. And if it does ever make sense to you, then just continue saying no to it. Question the shit out of people who seem so damn convinced with something that they won't even think twice about it. Don't put other people in any sort of prison of your imagining. Because right now, if you take the people in today's society and give them true liberty, they will enslave each other in these boxes of social conditioning, just freely of their own programming, because that's kind of the people they've been educated and encouraged to become. So in order to not fall into that trap, we have to treat each other as if this person has a dignity of spirit. They have the right to their own choices. They can make their life up for themselves. This is an adult. I don't need to treat this person like a child. And then if we stop imprisoning each other in these glass cages, and we stop letting other people put us in a glass cage, then who's going to stop anyone from being free? You just have to claim it, and it's already there. That's why it's a freedom. It's not a right. It's not a privilege, because no one could possibly take it from you.
Right.
They can kill you, but they're still not taking it from you. They're just killing you because how upset they are that they can't take it from you. It's the true inalienable right, to borrow a phrase from the Constitution, is that if you choose freedom, then behave of your own course. It doesn't make you free to harm other people. Well, I guess it does. It makes you free to harm other people, and that's why there would still be some problems. But it also makes you free to solve those problems instead of having a series of institutions having monopolistic control over finding those solutions for you. And if you don't like the one that they find for you, then you're fucked, because they're not going to try to find another solution for it for about 20 or 30 years. So being able to solve your own problems is infinitely more preferable to waiting around for someone else to solve your problems for you in the way that you would like them to be solved. So yeah, if you want a free society, just be the first free member of your own free society and wait for everyone else to come along by spreading the gospel. Not the gospel of John, Mark, Luke, or John, however. Or Alex. But yeah, why not have a voluntary fundamentalism? Like, nah, yeah, you're not going to make me do that shit. That's fundamental. like not all, yeah, I mean, I guess all fundamentalism is pretty dangerous, but
what if
it'd be nice to have a liberalizing fundamental instead of a repressing fundamental.
So given everything that you said, somebody walks up to you after what you said and was like, okay, so what does that mean? You're saying I should be homeless?
You can choose to be homeless. Absolutely. You can also choose to live in a house. You can choose to sleep on a cot. You can choose to,
take up carpentry?
Yeah, eat beans out of cans in a tent. If you don't learn carpentry, you're free to pursue your own course. The thing is, if someone's asking that question, then they're looking at me like I'm trying to tell them they can and can't do stuff.
I'm not going to babysit you. Yeah. I'm not going to take you by the hand and figure it out. You figure it out, asshole.
Exactly, yeah. And much of the problem in our interpersonal environment is that we're all trying to tell each other what we can and can't do. It's so pointless in the face of someone trying to tell everyone what they can and can't do. It's like, okay, now we're going to do this to each other in some sort of Stockholm Syndrome, M. Night Shyamalan plot twist. It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Let's ridicule it.
I think we did.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if the shoe fits, let the ridicule as well.
On next week's transmission, we will discuss the flat Earth, the Kepler telescope, lucid dreaming, Soylent as a food, developments in Syria, Gamergate, feminism, along with Bigfoot, lucid dreaming, e-cigarettes, the Bank of America scandal, dietary supplements, including krill oil, vacationing in Bali, cats, influence, all right, bloodlines of the Illuminati. On next week's transmission, stay tuned.